I've seen your jewelry, deeds, and the account. Thanks. My brother smirked into the security camera, stuffing my inheritance into his hoodie. Behind him, my parents stood watching, sipping beers and laughing like they had just won the lottery. I was in Chicago, in the middle of a multi-million-dollar presentation. When the live feed hit my phone, my family was robbing me blind. I excused myself, stepped into the hall, and made one call. My name is Lila Hartman. I am 34 years old, and I am the lead cyber risk officer for Aegis Corps Capital Security. My job is to walk into boardrooms filled with people who manage billions of dollars and explain to them, in calm, measured tones, how their entire world could collapse from the inside out. On this particular Tuesday, I was in Chicago, on the 40th floor of a skyscraper that was more glass than steel. Looking out over the river, the air in the conference room was expensive, smelling faintly of polished wood and stale coffee. I was at the climax of a pitch to one of the largest private banks in the Midwest. My presentation: Zero Trust Architecture, Trusting No One to Protect Everyone, was projected onto a massive LED screen behind me. The perimeter is dead, gentlemen, I said, my voice resonating with practiced confidence. I paced slowly, making eye contact with each of the 12 executives. The old model of building a fortress with a firewall is obsolete. We assumed that once someone was inside, they were trusted. That was the fatal flaw. I clicked the remote. A new slide appeared, a simple diagram showing a network. One node inside the trusted zone was colored red. The modern threat isn't just the hacker in a dark room thousands of miles away. The most catastrophic breaches, the ones that cost fortunes and end careers, almost always originate from within. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice for emphasis. A disgruntled employee, a compromised contractor, a family member with access they shouldn't have. The principle of zero trust is simple. Never trust. Always verify. Every user, every device, every single time. The CEO, a man with silver hair and a watch worth more than my car, nodded slowly. So, Ms. Hartman, you're telling us to treat our own people like the enemy? I'm telling you, I replied smoothly, to treat their access with scrutiny. We replace implicit trust with explicit, continuous verification. We create microsegments. We enforce multi-factor authentication. We log every single access request. We build a system so airtight that if someone does try to step out of line, we know it instantly. We detect, we contain, and we remediate before they can do real damage. I was about to move to the financial modeling slide when I felt it. Not a sound, but a vibration against my hip. My personal phone, not my work device. I had set specific haptic patterns for it. A single buzz was a text. A double buzz was a call. This was a sharp, insistent triple vibration. Priority alert. Breach. Home. I didn't break eye contact with the CEO. I kept my face a perfect mask of professional interest, but my blood ran cold. My home system in Madison, Wisconsin, was a fortress of my own design. It was my lab, my sanctuary. That alert pattern was reserved for one specific event, a catastrophic failure of the physical perimeter, or, as the case may be, the internal one. I continued speaking, my voice on autopilot. Our containment protocols mean that even if a bad actor gains access to one part of your network, while gesturing with my left hand, my right hand slipped beneath the polished mahogany of the conference table. I unlocked the phone with my thumb, my eyes still scanning the room. The screen lit up with the Aegis Corps Secure app I used for my own home. A red banner flashed across the top. Priority alert. Master bedroom. Motion detected. Another line, underneath it, made my breath hitch. Safe door opened. Authentication. Manual code. Manual code. Not my fingerprint. Not my facial scan. Not the duress code, which would have silently alerted the police. The manual code. A code that only 2 people on Earth knew. Me. And no. I had never told him. I couldn't have. My thumb swiped to the live feed. The connection lagged for a second. buffering over the bank's guest Wi-Fi, and then the image snapped into sharp, horrifying focus. It was my bedroom. Sunlight was streaming through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. And standing in front of my open wall safe, the one hidden behind the abstract painting, was my brother. Mason Hartman, 29 years old, with my father's eyes, my mother's weak chin, and an oversized gray hoodie that he probably hadn't washed in a week. He was unemployed, as he had been for most of his adult life, living off the scraps of my parents' indulgence and, I now realized, my own misplaced pity. He was laughing, a high-pitched, giggling laugh that I could hear faintly through the phone's speaker. He turned his head, as if listening to someone off camera. Then I saw them. Standing in the doorway, blocking the exit, were my parents, Leonard and Diane Hartman. My father had his arms crossed, a smirk on his face identical to his son's. My mother was holding a can of Miller Lite, sipping it at 11 in the morning, her eyes bright with a greedy, vicarious thrill. They weren't stopping him. They were his lookouts. They were his audience. I watched, paralyzed, the blood draining from my face. My words about containment protocols died in my throat. Mason turned back to the safe. He was humming. He reached inside and pulled out the first item, the navy blue velvet box. He popped it open. Even on the small screen, the diamond from my grandmother's engagement ring glittered. It was the only thing of hers I had, the only piece of my family history I treasured. He whistled, a low, impressed sound. "This'll fetch a bit," he said, his voice tinny but clear. He tossed the box onto my bed, next to his dirty sneaker. He reached back in and pulled out the thick vellum folder, the deed to the small cabin on the lake, the one my Aunt Claire had left to me, and me alone, in her will. My one place of peace, my one asset completely separate from the toxic swamp of my family's finances. He riffled through the papers like he was looking at a takeout menu. Finally, he pulled out the last item, a small, black USB drive. It was labeled in my own neat, block handwriting, Fire Escrow Accounts. It contained the encrypted credentials for the trust accounts I had been building for years, my escape hatch, my 5-alarm fire fund that would let me walk away from everything and everyone if I ever needed to. And then, the moment that shattered everything. Mason looked up. His eyes, unfocused for a moment, scanned the room and then locked onto the precise, hidden location of the pinhole camera I had installed above the door. He knew it was there. He had to have known. A slow, greasy smirk spread across his face. He held up the ring box, the deeds, and the USB, fanning them out like a winning poker hand. He was performing, for me. "I've seen your jewelry, deeds and the account," he said, his voice perfectly clear, aimed directly at his audience of one. "Thanks." He winked, a deliberate, grotesque wink. Then, slowly, he began to stuff everything into the pockets of his hoodie. The velvet box made a bulge on one side. The folded deeds and the USB went into the other. My mother laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Hurry up, Mace," she said, "before she gets home." "She's not getting home," my father's voice rumbled. "She's in Chicago, making all that money for us." The room tilted. The faces of the banking executives blurred into a watercolor smear of polite confusion. The CEO was still looking at me, waiting for an answer to a question I hadn't heard. I was no longer Lila Hartman, lead cyber risk officer. I was a child again, watching Mason get the last piece of cake, watching my parents pay for his speeding ticket, watching them mortgage their home to fund his failed startup, all while I worked 3 jobs to pay for my own community college books. I was talking about detecting and containing the bad actor from within, and the bad actors, my original insider threats, were currently robbing me blind and laughing about it. I lowered my phone. I locked the screen. I took one, single, shuddering breath and pushed all the emotion down, deep, deep down, into the cold, black box where I kept my trauma. I put the professional mask back on. It felt like buckling armor. "Gentlemen," I said. My voice was steady, terrifyingly steady. "Ladies, you will have to excuse me." I walked to the head of the table and picked up my laptop. "Isla, is everything all right?" the CEO asked, his brow furrowed with genuine, if mild, concern. "I have to stop this presentation for approximately 10 minutes, I stated. It was not a request. A security incident, a personal one. I didn't wait for a reply. I turned and walked out of the conference room, my heels clicking precisely on the marble floor. I felt 12 pairs of eyes on my back, a wave of confusion and irritation following me out. I pulled the heavy glass door shut, and the silence of the hallway enveloped me. I walked to the end of the hall, to the floor-to-ceiling window that looked down 40 stories onto the city. The cars below were tiny, metallic insects. I stood there for a count of 5. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unlock my phone again. The feed was still live. They were gone. The room was empty. The safe door was still hanging open, a gaping wound in my wall. My entire life, I had been the designated survivor, the responsible one, the one who would fix everything. I paid for my parents' new furnace. I co-signed the loan for Mason's car. I let them, all of them, believe that my success was their success, that my resources were their resources. And in return, they had just violated the one space I had ever called my own, stealing the past my grandmother gave me and the future I had built for myself. My training took over. This was no longer a family drama. This was an active, high-value theft. This was an insider threat event, and I knew the protocol. My thumb flew over the screen. I opened my contacts. My finger hovered over Mom, over Dad, over Mason. I could call them. I could scream. I could beg. I could threaten. And what would that accomplish? They would lie. They would gaslight me. They would say it was a misunderstanding, a joke. They would say I owed them. No. I scrolled past all of them, past my friends, past everyone I knew in a personal capacity. My thumb stopped on a single, starred contact, a name that represented the absolute bright line between my old life and my new one. Director Novak, Internal Response. Director Elias Novak, the man I reported to, the man whose entire job was to hunt down people like Mason, the man who handled employee theft, fraud, and corporate espionage. Calling him was not like calling the police. Calling him was like launching a tactical missile. It was irreversible. It would bring the full weight of a multi-billion-dollar financial security corporation down on my family. I looked at the empty, violated room on my phone screen. I heard my mother's laugh echoing in my memory. I heard my father's casual, cruel assumption. She's in Chicago, making all that money for us. If I did nothing today, if I let this slide, I would belong to them forever. My strength would be their weapon. My success would be their slush fund. I pressed the call button. My heart was hammering against my ribs. A trapped bird. The phone rang once, twice. "Novak," his voice answered, crisp and professional. No greeting. "Elias," I said, my voice as cold and clear as the glass in front of me. "This is Isla Hartman. I need to report an insider threat. It's active, and it's personal. My home system has been breached by a keyholder, and my assets have been stolen. I am looking at the live feed right now." There was a half-second of silence. "Understood. Isla," he said, his tone unchanged, as if I had just told him it was raining. "Do not contact the suspects. Do not go to the location. You are now a witness. Aegis Corps is handling this. Sit tight. I'm spinning up the team." The line clicked dead. One call, one decision. I lowered the phone, my hand trembling. I looked out at the Chicago skyline, a city of glass and steel, a city I had conquered. I didn't know if I was about to shatter my family into 1,000 pieces, or finally save myself from them. The glass of the 40th floor window was cool against my forehead. Down below, the Chicago River was a sluggish green ribbon. My breath fogged a small patch of the view. The live feed on my phone was dark now. The connection severed by Elias Novak's internal response team. but the images were burned into my mind. The open safe, the velvet box, and my parents' smiling faces. That, more than the theft, was the real wound, that casual, supportive audience. It pulled me back, across state lines and decades, to a place I had spent my entire adult life trying to firewall. Our home wasn't in Chicago. It was a small, one-story house in a town near Rochester, Minnesota. It had a patchy lawn that was always more brown than green, and a two-car garage that was the center of my father's universe, Leonard Hartman's Auto Repair. The garage was packed with tools, hydraulic lifts, and the smell of grease and coolant that clung to everything, including our clothes. My life was a ledger of small labors. From the age of 9, I was washing neighbors' cars on scorching July afternoons, the soap suds running down my arms. I pet sat, I mowed lawns, I delivered papers, every dollar, every quarter, went into a glass jar hidden under my mattress. I wasn't saving for a toy, I was saving for a Gateway 2000, a used laptop I'd seen in a classified ad, because I had discovered a library book on BASIC, and I knew, instinctively, that coding was a language I was born to speak. It was my way out. Mason never saved because he never had to. Mason was, as my mother always announced at family gatherings, our star. He was the heir. To what? I was never sure. The greasy garage? The failing business? His only talent was a quick, charming smile, an ability to lounge on the sofa playing video games for 8 hours straight, and a knack for making our parents laugh. He was the court jester and the crown prince rolled into one. When he broke my bike, it was an accident. When I failed to anticipate the break, it was my lack of responsibility. He was always forgiven, instantly and completely. I remember sitting on the linoleum kitchen floor, a roll of cloudy adhesive tape in my hand, performing surgery on the spine of a library book. My parents stepped over me, their eyes fixed on the television, indifferent to the meticulous care I gave to borrowed things. 3 days later, Mason, then 16, tossed his barely worn sneakers onto the carpet. "I'm bored of these," he declared. "Everyone at school has the new Air Jordans." I watched my father, who had complained about the price of milk that morning, nod slowly. "We'll see what we can do, son." The new shoes were on his feet by the weekend. This pattern was our blueprint. At a parent-teacher conference, my 9th grade English teacher, Mrs. Gable, held up my term paper. "Isla's work is exceptional," she said, her voice genuine. "Her analytical skills are college level. Frankly, she's one of the brightest students I've ever had." My parents exchanged a polite, thin smile, the kind you give a stranger. "That's nice," my mother said. Then she leaned forward, her expression suddenly animated. "And how is Mason doing? We really feel he has such strong leadership potential. Do you see that in his group projects?" Mrs. Gable blinked, momentarily thrown. "Mason's grades are adequate, Diane. He's awful." The savings jar under my bed was my first vault. One afternoon, I went to make a deposit, $3.50 from raking leaves, and I knew immediately the stack of quarters was lower. The $10 bill I'd tucked into the side was gone. It was not a large amount, maybe $20 in total, but it represented weeks of work. I found Mason in the living room, a new video game controller in his hand. When I accused him, he didn't even deny it. "I needed snacks and stuff for the arcade." He shrugged. I went to my parents, my face hot with injustice, holding the half-empty jar as evidence. My father didn't even look up from his newspaper. "So?" "He stole my money," I insisted, my voice rising. My mother sighed, a long, tired sound, as if I were the problem. "Isla, don't be dramatic. Your brother just borrowed it. He'll pay you back when he can." "He didn't ask." "Family doesn't have to ask," my father said sharply, finally lowering the paper. "It's just money." But it wasn't just money. It was my laptop. It was my future. And they had just sanctioned the theft. They never asked if I needed that money. They never demanded he return it. He never did. That was the day I changed my protocol. The jar was retired. I hollowed out an old copy of Great Expectations. I separated my savings into 3 different locations. I started a small, coded notebook, logging every single cent I earned and every cent I spent. Log everything. That habit, born of betrayal, became the foundation of my career. I learned at 10 years old what I now teach to global banks. The greatest threat is the one you trust, the one who already has a key. There was one exception in the Hartman family ecosystem: my Aunt Claire. Claire Monroe was my father's younger sister, a database administrator for a medical company in Rochester. She was everything my parents were not: precise, worldly, and quietly observant. She would arrive on Saturdays, not with the expected family platitudes, but with a box of bakery cookies and, for me, a book, never fiction, always something practical. Sam's Teach Yourself C++ in 21 Days, the soul of a new machine. She would sit at our cramped kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea, and watch the chaos. She watched my father praise Mason for simply existing, and watched my mother cut the pie and give Mason the largest piece. While the others were in the living room, she'd lean in, her voice low. "How are you planning to escape this place, Lila?" It wasn't a question of if, it was how. Aunt Claire was the one who encouraged me to apply for technology scholarships. She drove me to the city library, a place that felt like a cathedral, and showed me how to use the internet to research universities far outside of Minnesota. She taught me to see a world beyond the town limits, beyond the greasy concrete floor of my father's garage. Meanwhile, the family narrative only grew stronger. "Mason is going to take over the family business one day," my father would boom to anyone who would listen. He saw a dynasty, I saw a delusion. Mason hated the garage, he hated the smell of oil, he hated the physical labor. He couldn't stand to be in there for more than 5 minutes before complaining that the noise gave him a headache. His leadership was a fantasy they all agreed to believe. It was then I realized what love meant in the Hartman house. It wasn't an endless well. It was a finite resource, like coupons in a weekly circular. There was only so much to go around, and by the time I got to the counter, the good ones were always gone. Mason always got his fill, and I was expected to be grateful for whatever was left over. I only asked my mother directly one time. I was 14. I had just lost a babysitting job because I'd had to stay home to wait for a package for Mason's new gaming system. The loss of that $15 felt catastrophic. "Why?" I asked her, the word quiet and sharp in the hallway. "Why does every good thing in this house, every dollar, every minute of attention, go to Mason first?" My mother didn't get angry. She didn't deny it. She just tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. Her hand surprisingly gentle. She gave me that sad, watery smile that I had come to despise. "Because you're stronger, Isla," she said softly, as if this was a compliment. "You're the responsible one. You can take care of yourself. Mason, he needs us. You don't need looking after." Her words were meant to be a comfort, but they landed like a conviction. My crime was my competence. My punishment was their neglect. I was the load-bearing wall, and he was the precious, fragile vase on the mantelpiece. I blinked, the image of my mother's face dissolving, replaced by my own faint reflection in the Chicago skyscraper glass. I understood it now. They never hit me. They never locked me in a closet or starved me. No one would ever call it abuse. They just chose Mason. Every single time there was a choice, they chose him. And that is how you kill the other child without ever leaving a single bruise. The scholarship letter was a thin, official envelope from the University of Minneapolis. It was not just an acceptance. It was a full-ride scholarship for their new cybersecurity program. It was a key. It was an extraction order. I was 18 years old, and I was finally getting out. The contrast in departures was the summary of our entire lives. 2 months later, my parents threw a massive barbecue for Mason. The patchy backyard was filled with my father's friends from the garage, all drinking cheap beer and congratulating my brother. He had been accepted into the local community college, a 2-year program in business management that everyone knew was a holding pattern. My father bought him a beat-up but running pickup truck, slapped a future CEO bumper sticker on it, and handed him the keys to a round of applause. My mother brought out a cake, her eyes shining with pride. My departure was a week after that, at 6 in the morning on a gray, damp Tuesday. My entire life fit into one large, worn-out suitcase I'd bought at a thrift store. Aunt Claire had driven over the night before to give me 2 things: a used, heavy-duty laptop that she had refurbished herself, and a small envelope. Inside the envelope were 3 $100 bills. "This is your emergency fund, Isla," she'd said, her grip tight on my arm. "An emergency is defined by you. It is not for them. Do you understand me?" I nodded, tucking the money into my shoe. I dragged the suitcase to the garage, where my father was already working on an engine block. My mother stood in the doorway to the kitchen, holding a coffee mug. "Well, all right," my father said, wiping grease from his hands onto an already black rag. "Don't forget where you came from." It wasn't advice. It felt like a tether. "Remember to call," my mother added, her gaze already drifting back inside. "Mason will want to know how it is." I nodded, loaded the suitcase onto the shuttle bus I had booked myself, and I did not look back as we pulled away from the curb. Minneapolis was a baptism by ice. The anonymity was overwhelming and glorious. I disappeared into the university infrastructure. My life became a rigid, efficient algorithm. From 8 a.m. until 4 p.m., I was in class. Network protocols, cryptographic theory, secure programming. From 5 p.m. until 1 a.m. I was working the late shift at a campus coffee shop, the smell of burnt espresso and steamed milk clinging to my hair, just to cover food and books, and from 1 a.m. until 4 a.m. I was in the 24-hour computer lab, fueled by the caffeine I'd skimmed from my shift, diving into the digital world. I didn't just study, I consumed. While other students were struggling with the basic concepts of firewalls, I was reading the source code for open-source encryption modules. I learned to love the meticulous, sterile beauty of log files. They were the digital record of truth. A log file couldn't lie. It couldn't gaslight you. It couldn't tell you it borrowed the money when the entry clearly said, "Debit." The digital world was the only one that ever made sense to me. The only place where actions had clear, permanent, and logical consequences. In my sophomore year, the university's School of Engineering hosted a Capture the Flag security competition. The goal was to breach a server built for the event. I spent the first night analyzing the system. On the second day, I didn't just breach it. I found a 0-day vulnerability in the web portal software itself. I paused. I realized this was the same software the entire university used for its main student portal. I didn't crash the system. I didn't post my findings on the competition forum. I wrote a quiet, professional, 5-page vulnerability report. I detailed the flaw, the method of exploitation, which would grant access to every student's grades, social security numbers, and financial aid information, and proposed 3 distinct remediation patches. I bypassed the competition and slid the report under the door of the university's chief information security officer. The next day, I was called into his office. He looked like he hadn't slept. He offered me a paid internship on the spot, working with the university's internal security team. I was in. That internship, and his recommendation, got my resume onto a specific desk at Aegis Corps Capital Security. Aegis Corps was the apex predator of the financial security world. They were the ones banks and hedge funds called when they suspected one of their own was stealing from them. They flew me to Chicago for a final interview. They didn't ask me about my hobbies. They sat me at a terminal, gave me a hard drive containing 2 terabytes of network logs from a simulated breach, and said, "You have 2 hours. Find him." I found him in 52 minutes, a single, anomalous DNS request, masked as a routine update check, beaconing out to an IP address in Eastern Europe, hidden among millions of legitimate requests. My first year as an intern, and then a junior analyst, was that sifting through digital oceans of data, looking for the shark. I was good at it. I was patient. I read logs like other people read novels. My big break came during a crisis. A major client, a private wealth fund, was bleeding. Small amounts of money, pennies on the dollar, were disappearing from thousands of accounts simultaneously. It was a salami-slicing attack, too small to trigger individual alarms, but adding up to millions. Their internal team was blind. They suspected a high-level executive. I was tasked with the grunt work, reviewing firmware. Everyone else was looking at the executive's computers, but I was looking at the network hardware, the switches, the routers, the printers, and I found it. Buried deep in the firmware of a new, high-end line of office printers that had been deployed across the company was a single, malicious line of code. It wasn't a bug, it was a backdoor. Someone in the supply chain had planted it. It was scraping transaction data before it ever hit the financial servers. I didn't just find it, I stayed up for 48 hours straight, reverse engineering the malware. I presented a complete crisis report to the board of directors. I identified the source, the mechanism, and delivered a custom-written patch to neutralize the threat across all 1,000 of their devices. I did it all in under 1 hour. I had just saved them from total, catastrophic data leakage. My rise at Aegis Core was, as they say, meteoric, analyst, senior analyst, team lead, and finally, lead cyber risk officer. I was 29. I became the company's scalpel for insider threats. I was the one they flew to New York, to London, to Hong Kong, to sit in sterile boardrooms and explain, quietly and with unassailable data, how their trusted chief financial officer had been siphoning funds for 3 years. With the promotion came a salary my parents couldn't even comprehend. Aegis Core opened a new major branch in Madison, Wisconsin. I bought a 2-bedroom condo in a quiet, converted warehouse district. It was my first real home, and I applied my professional standards to my personal space. I built a fortress. It was not a simple alarm. It was an enterprise-grade, zero-trust system, biometric sensors at the door, tamper-proof contact sensors on the windows, network segmentation that kept my personal devices on a completely separate, firewalled network from any guest access, and the safe. The safe was not a box from a big box store. It was a TL30 rated high-security composite vault, custom installed and bolted directly into the concrete foundation of the building. It was hidden behind a false panel in my bedroom closet, set flush with the wall. Inside it, I kept the only 3 things that mattered: my past, my grandmother's platinum and diamond ring, which I'd had independently appraised. The valuation was just shy of $250,000. My present, the deed to the cabin on the lake. Aunt Claire had, in an act of profound foresight, transferred it into an ironclad living trust with me as the sole beneficiary, specifically structured to be untouchable by creditors or family claims. And my future? The black USB drive, the one labeled Fire Escrow Accounts. It held the encrypted keys to an offshore, fully legal, and completely undisclosed trust account, my real walk-away fund. The code for the safe was my ultimate secret. It was a 10-digit sequence. It was not my birthday. It was not my social security number. It was the date, month, year, and the exact minute, 2:17 p.m., of the first time Aunt Claire ever took me to Minneapolis, when I was 12. We stood on a bridge, and she pointed at the Fauché Tower, and it began to snow. It was the first moment I had ever felt truly safe and truly free. It was a memory that belonged only to me and to her. Nothing in the Hartman family could ever guess it. My old childhood habit of logging everything became my lifestyle. My home system logged every door opening, every key code entry, every device that touched my network. It logged who was on the property and when. It all fed into my private, encrypted cloud storage. I was, I believed, invulnerable. But technology cannot patch a human flaw. It cannot fix the stupid, sentimental, vestigial part of you that still wishes, after all the evidence, that your family was normal. 4 months ago, I was scheduled for a long-haul trip. A client in Singapore needed me on site for 2 weeks. It was the longest I would be away from my condo. My mail would pile up. My prized collection of houseplants would die. Mason called. His timing, as always, was perfect. He was in between opportunities again, which meant he was unemployed and living rent-free with my parents. "Hey, sis," he said, his voice dripping with that manufactured charm. "Heard you're skipping the country. Big shot." "Hi, Mason. What's up?" "Hey, I was thinking, you're gonna be gone a while, right? I could totally help out. You know, swing by, grab your mail, water your plants, just keep an eye on things for you." My entire body went rigid. Every professional instinct I had screamed no. Protocol violation, unvetted user, high risk. "That's okay, Mason," I said stiffly. "I can just put a hold on the mail." "Oh, come on. Lila," he laughed, that easy, practiced laugh. "What, you don't trust me? I'm your brother. I swear. I'll just pop in, pop out, 10 minutes. I'm just trying to help. God, you're so paranoid. It's just some stupid plants." That was the word, paranoid. The word my family had always used to describe my caution, my planning, my logs. And for one disastrous moment, I wanted to prove them wrong. I wanted to be the cool sister, the trusting sister. Against every fiber of my being, I relented. I gave him a spare key, a guest key, with restricted permissions. It wouldn't open my office. It wouldn't disarm the primary system, but it would get him in the front door. I mentioned it to Aunt Claire on a call the next night. Her silence on the other end of the line was cold. "Lila," she said, her voice sharp, "you are giving a key to your vault to the same person who used to steal the quarters from your savings jar." "It's fine, Auntie," I said, forcing a laugh. "The system is armed. The safe is locked. He can't get into anything important. He's just watering the plants." "A key is a key," she'd said. "He doesn't need to break in if you invite him." I dismissed it. I trusted my tech. I trusted the layers of biometrics, sensors, and encryption I had built. I taught the entire world how to lock their doors. I built digital fortresses for the most powerful financial institutions on Earth. But I trusted the one person who had been patiently studying my weaknesses, my passwords, and my blind spots since I was a child. The one person who knew I was, at my core, still that girl who just wanted her family to see her, and he had just used that weakness to steal my entire life. The drive from Madison to my parents' new place in the suburbs of La Crosse took just over 2 hours. 2 hours I could have spent running penetration tests on a new client's firewall deployment. That, at least, was a controlled environment. This was the annual Hartman Summer BBQ, a mandatory performance of family unity. I had failed to find a plausible work emergency to escape. I parked my Audi on the street, a stark black anomaly in a neighborhood of aging minivans and pickup trucks. The rental house was smaller than our old one, but the dynamic inside was unchanged. I pushed open the flimsy side gate, and the smell of lighter fluid and overcooked meat hit me. And there was the court, in session. Mason was the center of it, as always. He was sprawled in the yard's one comfortable patio lounger, his feet propped up on the beer cooler, a can already sweating in his hand. He was holding forth to the neighbors, the Jensens, who were listening with rapt, idiotic attention. "And so the venture capital guys, they're just eating it up," Mason was saying, gesturing broadly. "We're talking a 7-figure seed round, minimum. It's about disrupting the logistics space." He had never worked a day in logistics. He had never worked a day anywhere, really. My father, Leonard, was at the grill, flipping burgers with a proprietary air. His chest puffed out. "That's my boy," he said to Mr. Jensen, loud enough for the entire yard to hear. "Getting ready to call for capital. He's always had the golden touch." He spotted me by the gate, and his smile barely flickered. "Lila, you made it?" It was the same greeting he always gave me. "You're probably fine," he'd said to me just last Christmas. UAT people always have work. It was both an acknowledgement and a dismissal. My stability was boring. Mason's failures were exciting. My mother, Diane, rushed past me, not to greet me, but to deliver a fresh plate piled high with glistening ribs to her son. "You need to eat up, Maze," she cooed, ruffling his hair. "All these big meetings, you must be exhausted." She turned to me, and her eyes did the familiar, critical top-down scan. "Isla, honey, you're just having salad, right?" She didn't wait for an answer. "You have to watch your figure, a woman in your line of work, in the finance world, has to keep up appearances. No one trusts well, you know." I ignored the barb. "Hi, Mom. The burgers smell great. Dad?" I grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler Mason was using as a footstool and tried to fade into the background. No such luck. "Isla, the executive is here," Mason announced, waving me over. "Come on, sit down. Don't be antisocial." I sat on the edge of a wobbly plastic chair, a familiar tightness in my chest. "We were just talking about high-value assets," Mason said, his voice too casual. He took a long, slow drink of his beer, his eyes on me. "That old ring Grandma left you. Man, that thing must be worth a fortune now. Huh? An absolute fortune. What is that, like a 2-carat diamond?" I froze. "It's 3, actually," I said. My voice clipped. "And I don't really think about its value. Mason, it's sentimental." "Oh, right, sentimental," he sneered, as if I'd said a dirty word. "Sentimental is good, but valuable is better." He leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to make it seem conspiratorial. "And that cabin? The one Aunt Claire gave you? Is that just in your name? Or is that like a family asset?" My internal threat assessment system, the one I use daily at Aegis Corps, began flashing bright red. User, Mason Hartman, action, targeted query, asset ownership, threat level, high. This wasn't small talk. This was reconnaissance. It's in a trust, Mason," I said vaguely, trying to deflect. "A trust. Ooh, fancy," he laughed, but his eyes were sharp. "And all those investment accounts you're always tapping away at, you gotta move that money around, right? Reallocate? When do you usually do that? End of the quarter?" If Mason had been an employee on my network, I would have suspended his account, locked his terminal, and had security escort him from the building for that line of questioning. I forced a tight smile. "That's really not how any of that works, Mason." I looked to my parents, expecting them to finally, just once, step in and tell him he was being incredibly rude. Instead, they joined the interrogation. "He's right to ask, Isla," my father said, not even looking up from the grill. "You're the one with the head for numbers. You should be thinking about your brother. He's building a real empire here, and startups need capital. Real capital, not just play money." "That's right, honey," my mother chimed in, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're so good with all that. You probably have, 5, 6 different savings accounts by now? All that money just sitting there. You have to remember what we always taught you. Family invests in family. Mason's success is your success." The air went thin. This was not an ambush. It was a premeditated, coordinated attack. They were no longer just enabling him, they were directing him. They looked at me and saw a bank vault they had misplaced the key to. Just as I was trying to formulate an answer that wasn't "go to hell," the gate creaked open again. Aunt Claire. A wave of palpable relief washed over me. She was the only one who saw the family for what it was. She walked in carrying a store-bought angel food cake, her eyes, sharp as a security camera, taking in the entire scene in less than 3 seconds. She registered Mason on his lounger, my father beaming beside him, my mother fussing, and me, perched on the edge of my chair like a hostage. Mason, however, was too high on his own performance to notice the shift. He was still on a roll. He leaned even closer to me, his voice a slurred, theatrical whisper that the whole yard could hear. It's okay, sis. You can tell me. Your secrets are safe with me. He laughed, a short, barking sound. Seriously, that big fancy safe of yours. I bet I could guess the code. My heart didn't just stop. It felt like it had been instantly encrypted and I'd lost the key. Remember that night? He pushed, his eyes glittering. A few months ago, at that bar in Madison, after your big Singapore trip, when you were so jet-lagged and had, 2 glasses of wine? I couldn't breathe. I remembered. I had been foolishly, desperately happy. I had closed a major deal, and he had been nice. He had asked me about my life, my memories. What's your best memory, Isla? He'd asked, his voice soft. Not work, just you, the one that's just yours. And I, starved for a moment of simple, human connection with my own brother, had told him. I had told him about the day Aunt Claire took me to Minneapolis when I was 12, about standing on the bridge, seeing the Fauché Tower for the first time, and how it started to snow at exactly 2:17 in the afternoon, the first moment I had ever felt free. I hadn't told him the numbers, but in my drunken, lonely stupidity, I had given him the entire passphrase. Here, in the backyard. He winked at me. That story, that's your password for everything, isn't it? You really shouldn't keep something so important tied to something so obvious, sis. It's dangerous. Aunt Claire's head snapped toward him. Her gaze was no longer observant. It was lethal. I felt suddenly violently ill. I stood up, grabbing a stack of empty paper plates. I'm just going to clean these. I fled to the kitchen. The house was quiet, the sound of the party muffled. I turned on the faucet, the water scalding hot, and just stood there, my hands shaking. I am the lead cyber risk officer for Aegis Corps Capital Security, and I had just been socially engineered by my own brother. I had given a high-risk user the keys to the kingdom because I was naive enough to want him to like me. The screen door creaked open and shut. It was Aunt Claire. She came and stood beside me at the sink, not touching me, just watching me scrub a plate that was already clean. You look like you just saw a ghost, she said quietly. It's just the heat in here, I lied. Is it? She paused, her voice low and urgent. You gave him a key, Isla, to your home. It's a guest key. Auntie, it's fine. He just waters the plants. The system is armed. The safe is locked. He can't get into anything. Are you absolutely certain? She pressed. Right now, this second, are you 100% certain that all your keys, your house, your accounts, your life, are in the right hands? I needed to believe it. It was the foundation of my entire world. I have cameras, I said, my voice sounding defensive and childish even to me. I have motion sensors. I have encrypted logs. I have priority alerts. I control all the access points. I can see anything he does. I have it all under control. Aunt Claire looked at me, and her expression was one of profound, aching sadness. Not everything in life is a log file, Isla, she said softly. Some of the worst breaches don't make a sound. They're already inside. They smile at you, and they ask you to pass the potato salad. Before I could process that, Mason's voice boomed from the doorway. He was leaning against the frame, a fresh beer in his hand, a lazy grin on his face. He had followed us. He had been listening. What are you two whispering about in here? Sharing secrets? He chuckled. God, you're always so serious, sis. He turned his head and shouted back to the yard, his voice full of mocking laughter. Hey, everybody. You know my sister? She's so paranoid. She has cameras watching everything in her house. She probably has a camera on me right now. Right, Isla? The yard erupted in laughter. I heard my father's sharp, ha, and my mother's high-pitched giggle. Oh, that's just our Isla, she called out, always so serious. It was a joke, to all of them. It was just a funny joke about their paranoid, successful daughter. But I looked at Mason. He was still leaning in the doorway, and he held my gaze. The smile was on his lips, but it wasn't in his eyes. His eyes were cold, assessing, and triumphant. It wasn't a joke. It was a taunt. He was telling me he knew about the cameras, and he was telling me he didn't care. I stood there, surrounded by soap suds, and I felt the solid ground beneath me, the foundation of my entire, carefully constructed life, begin to crack. I could hear the sound of the ice breaking, but I was the only one in the room who wasn't laughing. Aunt Claire left 10 minutes later. She hugged me at the gate, a rare, fierce gesture. "Be careful, Isla," she whispered, and then she was gone. I stayed for exactly 1 more hour, the minimum time required to maintain the illusion of family. I cited an early morning server migration and a critical patch deployment. They waved me off, already turning back to Mason. I was halfway back to Madison, driving too fast in the dark, when my phone buzzed. It wasn't a system alert, it was a text message. From Aunt Claire. "If something happens, Isla, call me before you call them." I stared at the glowing white words at a red light. Call them. My heart hammered. Who was them? The police? Or was it my own company? Was it Aegis Corps? I didn't know, and the fact that I couldn't tell the difference terrified me. We are back in the present, in Chicago. I am standing on the 40th floor of the skyscraper, in front of the 12 banking executives. My voice is the only sound in the room, a practiced, confident monotone cutting through the expensive climate-controlled air. The principle of zero trust, I am saying, is simple. Never trust, always verify. Every user, every device, every single time. My personal phone, resting on the mahogany table beside my laptop, vibrates. The haptic pattern is sharp, insistent, a triple vibration. Priority alert. I do not look at it. I am a professional. I continue, pacing slightly. We create microsegments. We enforce multi-factor authentication. We log every single access request. The phone vibrates again, another triple buzz, and a third, a cascade of alerts. My system is not just notifying me, it is screaming at me. My blood chills. I keep my eyes on the CEO, but my hand slips discreetly under the table to pick up the device. I angle the screen away from view. The lock screen is a sea of red banners. Priority alert. 10:31 a.m. Front door unlocked. User, Mason Hartman. Key holder. Priority alert. 10:32 a.m. Main system disarmed. User, Mason Hartman. Key holder. Priority alert. 10:33 a.m. Master bedroom. Motion detected. And then, the one that makes my stomach drop into the polished marble floor. Priority alert. 10:34 a.m. Safe door opened. Authentication. Manual code. Manual code. Not my fingerprint, not my facial scan, not the 12-digit randomized key. The one, static, 10-digit manual override code. The code that should not be possible. Our containment protocols, I hear myself say, my voice suddenly sounding very far away, mean that even if a bad actor gains access, my thumb is already on the app. I bypass the logs and go straight to the live feed for the master bedroom camera. The connection buffers for a single, agonizing second. Then the image snaps into sharp, digital clarity. My bedroom, my sanctuary, and in the center of it, my brother, Mason. He is standing in front of the open closet, the false panel that hides the safe already pushed aside. He knew where to look. He is humming. His head tilted as he stares at the safe's digital keypad. He is not panicked. He is not frantic. He looks patient, like he's solving a puzzle he already knows the answer to. I watch, paralyzed, my breath caught somewhere in my chest. He lifts a hand, his movements slow and deliberate. He begins to type. My mind snaps, pulling away from the Chicago boardroom, yanked back 3 months to a dimly lit bar in Madison. It was after my Singapore trip. I was exhausted, jet-lagged, and stupidly, dangerously soft. Mason had been nice. He'd met me for a drink, listened to my stories, bought the first round. "You're a superstar, Isla," he'd said, his voice laced with an admiration I had craved my entire life. "But you're always so locked down. What's your best memory? Not work, just you, the one that's just yours." And I, like a fool, had told him. I told him about the day Aunt Claire took me to Minneapolis when I was 12, about standing on that bridge, seeing the skyline for the first time, and the way the snow started to fall at that exact moment. "What, like you remember the time?" He'd laughed. To the minute, I'd smiled, sipping my wine, lost in the memory. It was December 5th, 1998, at exactly 2:17 in the afternoon. "Wow," he'd said, shaking his head. That's like a password or something." I had laughed, a stupid, trusting laugh. "If you could guess that, I'd buy you a drink." His eyes had glittered in the dim light. "I'll remember that." I didn't tell him the code. I didn't have to. I had just given him the raw data for the algorithm. 12, 05, 98, 14, 17. My focus snaps back to the live feed on my phone. Mason's finger presses the final key. The small green access granted light on the keypad illuminates his face. Through the phone's tiny microphone, I hear the loud, heavy click-thunk of the half-inch steel bolts retracting. The heavy composite door swings open. Mason laughs. It is not the high-pitched giggle I heard in the hook. It is a low, satisfied, triumphant sound. He peers into the darkness of the safe as if he's looking into a treasure chest, the yellow glow of the safe's internal LED lighting his face from below. He reaches in. He pulls out the navy blue velvet box. He opens it. The 3-carat diamond from my grandmother's ring flashes, catching the light from the camera, blinding me for a second. "Bingo," he whispers. He tosses the box onto my unmade bed. He reaches back in and pulls out the vellum folder, the deed to the cabin. He pulls out the black USB drive, the one labeled Fire Escrow Accounts. He holds all 3 items up, fanning them out in his left hand, and then he turns his head. He scans the room, his eyes moving past the dresser, past the window, and then stopping, locking. He is staring directly into the pinhole lens of the camera. He knew it was there. His joke at the barbecue wasn't a joke. It was a final confirmation. He is looking at me, right at me, in this boardroom, 40 stories up, 200 miles away. A slow, greasy smirk spreads across his face. He is performing. "I've seen your jewelry, deeds and the account," he says, his voice perfectly clear, aimed directly at his audience of 1. "Thanks." He winks, a slow, deliberate, grotesque wink. And as he begins to stuff my life into the pockets of his filthy gray hoodie, 2 figures step into the frame behind him. My parents, Leonard and Diane. They are not shocked. They are not running to stop him. They are standing in the doorway, blocking the exit, as if they are his lookouts. My father has his arms crossed, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. My mother is holding a can of beer, sipping it, a small, proud smile on her lips as she watches her son. They are not just enabling him, they are his co-conspirators. They are his audience. The room tilts. The faces of the banking executives blur. My own presentation's slide behind me seems to mock me, detecting and containing the insider threat. My training, my professional instinct, cuts through the red haze of betrayal. With my thumb, I swipe away from the video feed. I pull up the app's primary access log. My eyes scan the data, and the real, professional horror sinks in. 10:31:04 a.m., front door, access granted, user, Mason Hartman. Key holder, 10:31:09 a.m., system alarm, disarmed, user, Mason Hartman. Key holder, 10:33:58 a.m., master closet safe, access granted, youth, manual code, user authorized. The logs are clean. There is no forced entry. There is no breach. According to the multi-$1,000 enterprise-grade system I designed and installed, this was not a theft. It was an authorized access event, A valid key holder had disarmed the system, and a valid manual code had been used to open the safe. I had given him the key, and I had given him the code. In a court of law, in front of an investigator, this log file did not make him look like a thief. It made me look like an accomplice. The blood drained from my face. I was suddenly ice cold. If I report this to the local police, what do I show them? A video of my brother, who has a key to my house, opening a safe with a code I gave him? It's a family dispute. He said, she said mess. And while I'm filing a police report that will go nowhere, Mason is at a pawn shop. He is at a bank. He is liquidating my grandmother's ring. He is attempting to file a fraudulent quitclaim on my property. He is trying to crack the encryption on my USB drive. By the time I could get a restraining order, my assets would be gone. Ms. Hartman? I look up. The CEO is staring at me, his brow furrowed. Is everything all right? I lowered my phone. I locked the screen, the image of my mother's smiling face burning into my retinas. I put the device into my pocket. I turned and picked up my laptop from the table, closing it with a soft, final thud. Gentlemen, I said. My voice was a flat, dead monotone. It did not shake. You will have to excuse me. I walked to the door, my heels clicking on the floor. Isla? The CEO called after me, his voice now laced with irritation. We are in the middle of a proposal. I stopped at the door, my hand on the heavy steel handle. I looked back at the room full of powerful men. We will have to continue this later, I said, my voice as cold as the glass tower around me. I have just been presented with a vivid, real-time illustration of an insider threat. I did not wait for a reply. I pulled the door open and stepped into the silent, carpeted hallway. I walked to the end of the hall, to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. My hands were shaking. My professional life was flashing before my eyes. This was not just a family theft. This was a catastrophic personal data breach. My brother had accessed my home, my safe, and by taking that USB drive, he had potentially compromised my entire career. I was the expert. I was the one who was supposed to be immune. If I handled this wrong, I would not just lose my inheritance, I would be fired. I could be sued by my own company. I needed a team that was faster than the police. I needed a team that could freeze assets with a single phone call. I needed a team that understood, implicitly, that the log files were lying. I needed forensics. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the contacts. My finger slid past Mom, past Dad, past Aunt Claire. I stopped on a single, starred entry, a name that represented the absolute bright line between my personal life and my professional power. Director Elias Novak, Internal Response and Forensics. My finger trembled over the call button. This was not calling 911. This was not filing a report. This was activating a mechanism, a cold, corporate, and lethally efficient mechanism that I, myself, had helped design. I looked at the black screen of my phone, and in the reflection, I saw the ghost of my father's smile. I pressed the button. The phone rang exactly 1.5 times. Novak. His voice was flat, devoid of surprise. Elias Novak lived in a permanent state of controlled crisis. My call was just another data point. I stood in the glass hallway, my back to the empty boardroom, and I switched modes. The part of me that was a daughter, the betrayed, weeping, furious part, was locked in a server rack, firewalled off. The part of me that answered was the lead cyber risk officer. Elias, I said, my voice as flat as his. This is Lila Hartman. I am formally reporting a high-severity insider threat, active as of 10:34 a.m. Central Time. Go ahead, Lila. I heard the faint click-clack of his keyboard in the background. He was already building the case file. Location of breach: my personal residence, 2200 Bayside Lofts, Unit 405, Madison, Wisconsin. Primary suspect: Mason Hartman. Relation: brother. Access level: peripheral. He was granted a guest keyholder profile for my home's smart system. Continue, he said. Assets compromised. 1 secure wall safe, model TL30. Contents include one heirloom diamond ring, estimated value $250,000, one folder containing personal legal documents, specifically the deed to a property in northern Wisconsin, one encrypted USB drive, black, labeled Fire Escrow Accounts. I paused, and this was the critical part. Elias, that USB drive contains encrypted credentials. I must assume, given the nature of the theft, that it is a targeted attack. I cannot guarantee that client data is not at risk, as the drive did contain encrypted professional notes. That was the trigger. The moment I said client data, the entire incident escalated from a personal matter to a full-blown corporate security crisis. Understood, he said. The typing became more rapid. You said he had guest-level access. How did he bypass the safe? Social engineering. He obtained the manual override code from me verbally, under false pretenses. Approximately 3 months ago, I have video and log confirmation of the breach. The video feed shows him knowingly performing for the camera. Co-conspirators? My throat tightened. Just for a second. I forced the word out. Yes, 2, Leonard Hartman and Diane Hartman. Relation. Parents. They were present on the feed, in the room, acting as lookouts. I had just reported my entire family to my boss, the head of internal investigations, like I was reporting a data anomaly. I felt sick, but I did not let it into my voice. There was a pause. The typing stopped. Then, Elias asked the question I knew was coming, the question I would have asked. Isla, your professional file notes complex financial relationship with your family. Are you 100% certain that all assets within that safe are legally and exclusively yours? Is there any ambiguity? Any shared ownership, verbal agreements, inheritance disputes that your brother or parents could leverage to claim legal right? He was asking the logical question. He was asking if this was a family dispute, because if it was, Aegis Corps' hands were tied. It would be a civil matter, and we would have to loop back to the local police, who were hours behind, who would get lost in the he said, she said. I took a breath. Elias, the ring and the USB are exclusively mine. The property deed is more complicated, but it is not a dispute. It is a legal certainty. Explain. That's why I'm making my second call as soon as we disconnect, I said. This is a two-front response. I need you to handle the technical and financial side. The legal side is already provisioned. Elias was silent for another second. He was processing. He was a master at this, and he understood what I was not saying. I was not a panicked victim. I was a colleague executing a pre-planned contingency. Understood, he said. The shift was immediate. The case was real. Aegis Corps is now formally taking lead on this incident. This is a high-severity insider theft event, logged at 10:41 a.m. You are the primary victim and material witness. As such, you are now under protocol. I know, I said. This means you do not go to the location. Isla, do not fly to Madison. Do not leave the Chicago office. You are to stay in a secure conference room until our local team notifies you that the scene is clear. Is that understood? Understood. You do not contact the suspects. No texts, no calls, no emails. You do not contact Mason or your parents, no matter what they say to you. You do not respond. Any communication from you could be construed as witness tampering or coercion. You will compromise the entire case. Do you understand me? I understand completely, Elias. Good. My team is already active. We are flagging your social security number, your accounts, and your name across all major financial networks. We are placing an immediate freeze on any transaction attempts related to your known assets. We are liaisoning with Madison PD and sending our own forensics team to your condo. They will take precedence. This was the power I had called upon. Not a local cop, but a global financial security firm. They weren't just going to find Mason. They were going to vaporize his access to the world. Before he could even get to a pawn shop, the ring would be flagged in a global database as stolen. Before he could get to a bank, my accounts would be on a level of lockdown that no teller could bypass. Go back into your meeting, Isla, Elias ordered, his voice cold. Tell them you have a client emergency and need to use their conference room. Find a room, lock the door, and wait. I'll be in touch. The line clicked dead. I stood there for a moment, the silence of the 40th floor rushing back in. Part 1 is complete. The technical response was in motion. Now, for Part 2, the legal one. My finger went back to my contacts. I scrolled past Director Novak. I found the other starred name, the one I had saved just a week after that horrifying family barbecue. Aunt Claire. I pressed call. She picked up before the first ring finished, as if she had been sitting by the phone, waiting. Isla. Her voice was not surprised. It was calm, steady, and full of a sad, cold resolve. He did it, Auntie, I whispered. My voice broke, just for a second. The professional mask cracked. He was in my house. He opened the safe. He took everything. The ring, the cabin deed, the USB. He took it all. Mom and Dad were there. They watched him. They were laughing. The tears I had refused to shed for Elias now came, hot and furious. I scrubbed them away with the heel of my hand. On the other end of the line, there was no gasp, no shock, no, "Oh my God, Isla!" There was only a long, heavy, weary sigh. "Of course he did," she said, her voice a low rumble of anger. "Of course they were. I told you, my dear. You gave a vault key to the boy who stole the quarters from your savings jar. The only thing that's changed is the size of the payout." "I know," I choked out. "I know. I was so stupid. No. She cut me off, her voice suddenly sharp as steel. "You were hopeful. There is a difference. Hope is a vulnerability, and they exploited it. That is not your fault. That is their crime." I called Aegis Corps. Auntie, I called Director Novak. They're handling it. They're freezing everything. But they asked about the cabin, about the legal standing. Mason has the deed, the physical paper. "The paper?" she scoffed. "He can have the paper. He can frame it. He can use it for kindling. It is a useless, symbolic piece of pulp." I stopped, my breath catching. What do you mean?" "Isla," she said, and I could hear the faint smile in her voice. "Did you really think I would just hand you that cabin, knowing my brother and his family? Knowing how they look at you? Like you're their private ATM? I told you I set up a lock you didn't know about." I remembered her words. Not everything in life is a log file. "The cabin," Aunt Claire continued, her voice precise, "and a significant portion of the assets you inherited from me are not in your name, not really. They are held by the Monroe Hartman Living Trust." "A living trust?" "Yes, a very, very specific, ironclad, irrevocable living trust. I set it up the day after your grandmother's funeral, when I watched your father try to convince the executor that her ring should go to Mason as the family heir. I knew then what they were. I spent $10,000 on the best estate lawyer in Minnesota. And do you know who the co-trustees of that document are, Isla?" My mind was racing. "Me? And you?" "Me and you," she confirmed. "To move, sell, lease, borrow against, or in any way transact against that property requires 2 signatures, yours and mine. The deed Mason is holding is worthless without my signature. Any attempt to file it, to borrow against it, to sell it, it's not just a civil matter. It is a felony. It is attempted fraud against a legally protected trust. He didn't just steal from his sister. He just tried to steal from me." I sank against the glass wall, my knees weak. I had been protected all this time, and I never even knew it. She had seen this coming, not just for months, but for years. "I watched them, Isla," she said, her voice hardening. "I watched them give him the bigger piece of cake, the new shoes, the benefit of the doubt, every single time. I watched them tell you that you were the strong one as an excuse to neglect you. And I knew, one day, their greed would make them stupid, and it would make them criminals. Today is that day." "So what do I do?" "Nothing," she said. You have already done your part. You called your company. You activated your machine. Now, I activate mine. I am hanging up, and I am calling the Trust's legal counsel. We will be filing a formal complaint of felony fraud with the state of Wisconsin, and we will be filing for an immediate injunction against Leonard, Diane, and Mason Hartman. Your company will freeze their money. My lawyers will freeze their lives. I closed my eyes. The cold glass felt good against my hot cheek. One call. I thought I had made one call. But I hadn't. I had been the second call. The first call had been made by my aunt, over a decade ago, to a lawyer's office in Minneapolis. I stood in that silent, empty glass hallway, and I finally understood. My one call hadn't been a single action. It was the final, concussive event. I had just triggered a massive, two-pronged machine. A machine that had been designed by an expert in cyber forensics and an expert in my family's pathology. Aegis Corps, with all its global power, and Aunt Claire, with all her quiet, patient, righteous fury. Mason and my parents hadn't just broken into a safe, they had just willingly walked into a complex, multi-layered trap that had been waiting for them my entire life. I was not on the 40th floor. After the call to Elias, I had been escorted by a silent, stone-faced security guard from the bank's executive wing to a spare internal conference room on the 38th floor. It was a glass box, but it had no view. It faced the building's concrete core. There was one table, one phone, and one secure Aegis Corps laptop. My laptop, my real laptop, the one my team had waiting for me. Elias had not been joking. I was no longer a visitor. I was a witness. And I was in an Aegis Corps holding pattern. The screen of the laptop was my only window. It was split into 4 quadrants. Top left, the live feed from my bedroom camera, showing the gaping, violated safe. Top right, the feed from my living room camera, showing the empty hall. Bottom left, a secure chat window, connected directly to Field Agent Kravitz. Bottom right, a new feed, labeled Field Body Cam 01. It was jittery, showing the back of a police officer's head. I was watching my own life as a case study. I was the client and the lead investigator, sitting in a sterile room 200 miles away, feeling the phantom vibration of my stolen life. The action started without warning. The field cam feed, which had been focused on the hallway of my condo building, suddenly lurched. I heard a loud, heavy knock. Thud. Thud, thud. I instinctively switched my gaze to the top right quadrant, my living room. I watched my own front door. I saw the peephole darken. Then, the deadbolt turned. The door swung open. It was Leonard, my father. His face was flushed, arrogant, and annoyed. "What?" he snapped. "We're in the middle of something. Whatever you're selling. We don't want it." A man in a Madison Police Department uniform stepped partially into the frame, his hand resting on his belt. "Leonard Hartman?" "Yeah, who's asking?" A second man stepped forward, bypassing the cop. He was older, with a sharp face, and he wore a black Aegis Corps windbreaker. The logo was small, but it was visible. "Mr. Hartman," the man said, his voice calm and carrying. I recognized him. Kravitz, our best field forensics agent. "I'm Agent Kravitz with Aegis Corps Capital Security. We are here with the Madison Police Department to execute a court order to protect financial assets and secure digital evidence at this location." I watched my father's face on the screen. The arrogance did not fade, but it was joined by a sudden, sharp confusion. Aegis Corps. The name had landed. He knew, vaguely, that this was where I worked. He couldn't process why they were at my door. What are you talking about?" he stammered. "This is our daughter's place, Isla. There's no problem here. We need you, and everyone else inside, to step out into the hallway, sir, now." "What's going on?" Mason's voice, he appeared behind my father, a perfect performance of groggy confusion. He was rubbing his eyes. "Dad, who is this?" "We're here to protect assets," my father said, the words sounding stupid in his own mouth. Everyone out, now, the cop repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. My mother, Diane, appeared, her hand fluttering to her throat. Oh, dear. Leonard, what's happening? I watched them, the three of them, file meekly into the hallway, their faces a mask of theatrical innocence. The field cam swiveled, and I saw Kravitz and two officers enter my condo, my home. The chat window on my screen flashed. Field Agent Kravitz. Isla, we are inside. The suspects are contained in the hall. Where are the items? My fingers flew across the keyboard. Isla Hartman. Gray hoodie, on the back of the kitchen chair. He's wearing a different shirt now. Field Agent Kravitz. Copy. I watched the body cam feed. Kravitz walked straight past my baffled family, through the living room, and into the kitchen area. There it was, the gray hoodie, slung over a chair, exactly as I had seen it. Kravitz didn't hesitate. He picked it up. He felt the pockets, his face impassive. He reached into the main pocket. He pulled out the navy blue velvet box. He pulled out the vellum folder. He pulled out the black USB drive. He held each item up to his body camera, one by one, the red REC light on the camera reflecting in his glasses. Documenting one ring box, one folder of papers, one USB storage device. From the hallway, I heard my mother's voice, a high-pitched wail. Those are Isla's. Mason was just looking at them. She lets him. Kravitz ignored her. He saw the backpack on the floor by the chair. Mason's go bag. Is this yours, sir? He called out. That's just my bag, my clothes, Mason yelled, his voice cracking with real panic now. You can't go through that. We can, and we will, Kravitz said. He unzipped the main compartment. He pulled out a pair of jeans, a t-shirt, and then, from the bottom, a large bulging manila folder. He placed it on my kitchen counter. He opened it. The chat window flashed again. A new file. IMG evidence 001.jpg. I clicked it. My breath left my body. It was not a single image. It was a composite scan of what was in that folder. A stack of credit card statements, a stack of collection notices, and a small, neat pile of pristine, unactivated credit cards. A Visa signature card, a Discover It card, an American Express Platinum. All bearing the name Isla M. Hartman. My name, my social security number, but I had never opened these. Another image popped up. IMG evidence JPG. It was a close-up of a loan agreement from a lacrosse credit union, dated 18 months prior, a personal loan for $20,000. The address listed was my parents' house. The signature on the electronic dotted line was a crude, almost childish forgery of my own. This was not a one-time smash and grab. This was not about Mason needing startup money today. This was a long-term, systematic campaign of identity theft. They had been living off my credit, destroying my name, for years. In the hallway, Leonard must have seen the agent holding the statements. He lost his composure. He lunged past the officer. "That's not what it looks like," he screamed, his face purple. We were helping her, building her credit. That's what you do. You help your family. She's got so much money, she doesn't even notice this stuff." The officer grabbed him, spun him around, and pushed him back against the wall. "Sir, you need to be quiet. What you just described is felony identity theft, and we are recording." The small red light on the officer's chest was a tiny, blinking, damning eye. Kravitz, to his credit, never looked up from his task. The credit cards were a matter for the local police. His priority was the USB drive. Isla. His voice came through my headset now, a direct, secure audio line. The drive. I'm connecting it to the forensic bridge. I need to know what I'm looking for. It's partitioned, I said, my voice shaking. I hated this. The first partition is personal, a trust fund I manage for my aunt. The second is professional. Professional how? His voice was sharp. It's a backup, I admitted. shame washing over me. Encrypted notes, penetration testing vulnerability reports, it's Aegis core data. The silence on the line was deafening. I had just admitted to a catastrophic breach of corporate policy, having sensitive client data on a personal device, even an encrypted one, even in a secure safe. It was a fireable offense. Lila, Kravitz began, his voice strained. Which client? KPG, I whispered. Oh, Christ, he breathed. The KPG account was our largest, a multi-billion-dollar banking conglomerate that was under a federal oversight agreement. Okay, I'm running the decryption key you provided. Stand by. I watched the progress bar on my screen. My career was ending. Wait a minute, Kravitz said, his voice suddenly electric. The drive's internal log. It shows an access attempt. Time-stamped 10:51 a.m. That's less than 10 minutes ago, after he took it from the safe. What? He plugged it into his laptop. Lila. He tried to get in. He failed the passphrase, but the attempt was logged by the drive's firmware. He made an active attempt to access the data. I could not breathe. I was no longer a victim of a protocol breach. I was the victim of a federal crime. Kravitz, I said. That drive contained privileged, sensitive data on federally insured financial institutions. His attempt to access it, that's not just theft. That's a violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, Kravitz finished, his voice grim. He just crossed a line from state felony to federal. In the hallway, my mother had apparently reached the climax of her performance. The audio feed from the body cam picked up her hysterical sobs. It's her fault, she shrieked, pointing at the camera, as if it were me. She's always showing off. Her big job, her fancy car, all her money. She never shares. She never helps her brother. He just needed a little bit to get started. We just thought she wouldn't even miss a little bit. The officer, a man who had clearly heard enough, turned to Mason. Mason was white as a sheet, his eyes darting between his weeping mother, his raging father, and the cold, silent Aegis Corps agent. Mason Hartman, the officer said, his voice booming in the small hallway. You are under arrest for grand larceny and suspicion of identity fraud. You have the right to remain silent. As the officer cuffed him, Kravitz stepped forward and spoke quietly into the officer's ear. The cop nodded, his eyes widening slightly. Let me amend that, the cop said, pulling Mason to his feet. You are being detained on suspicion of grand larceny, identity fraud, and pending federal charges for violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. You need to come with us, now. I watched on the split-screen feed. My own camera showed them being led out of my living room. The body cam showed Mason's terrified, uncomprehending face as he was guided into the elevator. He still thought this was about a ring. He had no idea what he had done. I closed the laptop, plunging the room into darkness. He had just picked up a bomb, thinking it was a piggy bank, and I had been the one to light the fuse. The immediate aftermath was a blur of sterile, soundproof rooms. I was flown back to Chicago, but not to my apartment. I was housed in a corporate suite secured by Aegis Corps. My professional life was, for the moment, on ice. To be clear, Lila, you are not under investigation. Elias Novak had told me, his face an impassive mask in a video call. You are the victim of a federal crime. However, the data on that USB drive, it puts us all in an extremely delicate position. You're benched from the KPG account and all related sensitive projects, effective immediately, conflict of interest. It was a demotion. No matter how politely he phrased it, I, the expert on insider threats, had become the single greatest insider liability in the company. However, he continued, no one on earth knows your home system, your personal network, or the primary suspects better than you. Legal has approved your retention on this case file IH001, as a subject matter expert and technical consultant. You will work with Kravitz. I expect your full, objective analysis. Objective. He wanted me to write a case study on the destruction of my own life. "Understood, Director," I said, my voice flat. And so, I did. I was given secure access to the complete forensic data package, and I began to dissect my family as if they were a piece of malicious code. The digital evidence was pristine, a perfect, damning narrative. The Aegis Corps team had imaged every device. The first file I opened was the log from my own smart home system. It was exactly as I had seen. 10:31:04 a.m. Front door, access granted. User, Mason Hartman. Keyholder. 10:31:09. System alarm, disarmed. User, Mason Hartman. Keyholder. 10:33:58 a.m. Master closet safe. Access granted. Youth. Manual code. User authorized. There was no brute force. There was no hack. The log file told a simple, clean story. I had given the attacker the key, and I had given him the password. This, on its own, would have been Mason's entire defense. But Kravitz had dug deeper. He pulled the logs from my camera system. 10:29:15 a.m. Live feed access. User, Mason Hartman. Source IP, 72.44. Mason's phone. He had checked. He had logged into the camera app, using the credentials I had foolishly also provided, to see if I was watching before he made his move. The taunt at the barbecue had been his final reconnaissance. Then, there was the data from Mason's phone. This was the linchpin. At 10:16 a.m., approximately 15 minutes before the robbery, he had sent a text message to a contact labeled Marco P., a name our forensics team cross-referenced with local police and identified as a low-level bookie to whom Mason owed a significant sum. The message read, "It's on. My psycho sister is in Chicago. I'm going in. The ring and the papers. We are funded. I'm talking 6 figures. Easy. Get ready." But the most damning file was a photograph, time-stamped 3 weeks prior. It was a blurry, poorly lit picture of the inside of my safe, showing the velvet box and the vellum folder. He had been in my house, had opened my safe, at least once before. He had been planning this for almost a month. That day, he had been just browsing. Today was the day he had decided to buy. Then, I moved to the financial investigation. This was the part that truly cut me. The Aegis Corps Financial Crimes Unit had run my Social Security number against every major credit bureau. What came back was not a report. It was an avalanche. They had found the manila folder in Mason's bag, but the reality was so much worse. The identity theft was not recent. It had been happening for years. I sat in that silent corporate suite, staring at a PDF file that represented a 20-year betrayal. Page 1. An American Express Platinum card. Opened in my name. 2 years ago. Billing address. My parents' house in La Crosse. Current balance. $19,450. Page 2. A Discover It card. Opened in my name. 3 years ago. Billing address. My parents' house. Current balance. $12,200. Maxed out. Page 3. A personal loan from a credit union. $20,000. Taken out 18 months ago. The e-signature was a sloppy, ridiculous approximation of my name, the kind a child would draw. The purpose of the loan, listed on the application, was home improvement. They had used my stolen identity to pay for their new roof. One by one, I read them: store cards, gas cards, small personal loans. It was a sprawling, parasitic ecosystem, all feeding off my name, my credit, my existence. They hadn't just stolen from my future. They had been stealing from my past, from the good credit I had painstakingly built since I was 18. I had to read each statement like it was an indictment. Each line item was a separate, intimate act of betrayal. A $100 charge at a steakhouse. Was that their anniversary dinner? Paid for by me? A $400 charge at a home improvement store? Was that for my father's garage? They hadn't just seen me as a resource. They saw me as an extension of themselves. My name was their property. While I was drowning in this, Aunt Claire's lawyers were building the second wall. She called me that evening. The legal team has been in contact with the Wisconsin state prosecutor, she said, her voice crisp and cold. The Monroe Hartman Living Trust is ironclad. As we established, it requires 2 signatures. Any attempt by Mason, or by Leonard, acting as his proxy, to file that deed, sell that property, or borrow against it, is not a civil dispute. It is felony-level trust fraud. The state is adding it to the charge sheet. Then came the report from Mason's interrogation. I read the transcript. At first, he had been all charm and confusion. "This is just a family misunderstanding," he told the detectives. "My sister, Isla, she and I are really close. She lets me borrow stuff all the time. She's always promised to help me with my startup. This is just her being angry and dramatic. She'll call you and clear this all up. I promise." The detectives let him talk for nearly 20 minutes. Then, the state investigator, a woman with the Financial Crimes Unit, slid a single piece of paper across the table. "Mr. Hartman," she asked, "can you please explain to us the legal structure of the Monroe Hartman Living Trust, which, according to our records, is the sole legal owner of the cabin?" Silence. The transcript noted that the suspect stared at the document for approximately 30 seconds. What? The trust?" Mason had stammered. "The trust," the investigator confirmed. "The legal entity you were attempting to defraud by stealing the deed. Can you tell us who the other co-trustee is? The one whose signature you would have needed?" I don't know what you're talking about," Mason said. "It's a cabin. My aunt gave it to Isla. It's just a piece of paper. It's family." That was it. "It's just a misunderstanding" defense evaporated. He hadn't just stolen something he thought he was entitled to. He had stolen something he did not even understand. He saw a piece of paper and, like a child, assumed it was his. While Mason was realizing his profound, life-altering mistake, the Aegis Corps internal review concluded. An email from Elias Novak appeared in my inbox. It was concise. Subject: Case File. IH-001. Internal Review. Finding Isla. The Internal Standards Board has reviewed your conduct related to the KPG data on the compromised USB drive. Finding: while the storage of this data on a personal device was a technical violation of Policy 7.4b, your immediate and protocol-perfect reporting of the breach saved this firm and our client from catastrophic exposure. Your actions in the first 5 minutes were faster than our documented response plan requires. The board has concluded you are the victim, not an accomplice. You are formally cleared of all internal misconduct. Welcome back to the KPG account, effective immediately. I felt a cold, thin tendril of relief. I had my job back. My career was not over. But the war was not over. As if on cue, my phone, which had been silent for 2 days, began to light up. My parents had found a lawyer, and they had found their narrative. Voicemails began to flood my inbox. I let every single one go to the digital recorder. Later that night, in the sterile silence of my corporate suite, I listened to them. I saved each one to a secure folder. I was logging the emotional data. VM log 01. Diane, MP3. Isla, honey, pick up. Isla, please. This is all a terrible, terrible misunderstanding. Your father and I, Mason was just, he didn't mean it. Honey, you have to tell them. You have to call them off. You're the one with the power. Tell them to let your brother go. Her voice was a high-pitched, theatrical wail of fake tears. VM log 02. Diane, MP3. Why aren't you answering me? Isla, it was Mason's idea. All of it. He told us you wanted to help. He said you'd be fine with it. We were just trying to support your brother. How can you do this to him? How can you do this to us? VM log 03. Leonard, MP3. The tone changed. This was my father. The charm was gone. The The confusion was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard rage I had known my entire life. You ungrateful, cold-hearted. After everything we did for you, we raised you, we fed you, we gave you a home. And this is how you repay us? By sending your corporate police to our door? You think you're so much better than us with your big job and your fancy condo? You were always like this. Selfish, cold. You are a traitor to your own blood. Isla, a traitor. I listened to each one. I did not cry. I just saved the files. They were the final pieces of evidence, the final, definitive log entries that confirmed what I had always known. They had never seen me as a daughter. I was a resource, a tool. And now that the tool was refusing to cooperate, it was being labeled defective. The next morning, a final, beautiful piece of data arrived. My parents' new lawyer, a bottom feeder from La Crosse, had sent a cease and desist letter, not to me, to Elias Novak, to the Aegis Corps legal department. Elias forwarded it to me without comment. I read the text. It has come to our attention that your employee, Ms. Isla Hartman, is leveraging her significant position and the vast technical resources of Aegis Corps Capital Security to harass, intimidate, and persecute her own family for a minor, private domestic dispute. I actually laughed, a single, short, bitter sound in the empty room. They had admitted it, in a legal document. They had admitted that they knew I had power. They had admitted they knew I had resources. Their entire complaint was not that I was lying. Their complaint was that, for the first time in my life, I was finally using my power to protect myself from them. The last file in the case package was waiting for me. It was from the Wisconsin State's Attorney's Office. It was a stack of papers. The official, consolidated criminal complaint, grand larceny, conspiracy to commit fraud, multiple counts of felony identity theft, and the federal charge, attempted access of a secure computer system. At the very end was a signature page, a simple line, asking for my formal statement and signature, confirming my desire to proceed with prosecution against all three suspects. I picked up a pen. I looked at the names on the page. Mason Hartman, Leonard Hartman, Diane Hartman. My hand was perfectly steady as I signed my name, Isla M. Hartman. I put the pen down. I stared at my signature. A question echoed in the cold, quiet room, the same question I had asked myself in that glass hallway in Chicago. Was I destroying my family? Or was I finally, after 34 years, just closing the log file on a hack that had been running against me for my entire life? The Dane County Courthouse was a circus, a standing-room-only event. The press had picked up the story, framing it with a salacious headline, "The Insider, cybersecurity expert, sues own family for insider theft." The gallery was packed. I saw a row of familiar faces from the Aegis Corps Chicago office, including Elias Novak, who sat in the back, his face a perfect mask of neutrality. I saw my parents' neighbors, the Jensens, their faces slack with avid, greedy curiosity, and I saw my family, or what was left of it. They were across the aisle, a tableau of cheap suits and cheaper indignation. I sat in the front row, directly behind the state prosecutor. I wore a charcoal black suit, my hair pulled back so tightly it hurt my scalp. I was a professional in a room that was dissecting my personal life. Behind me, I felt a hand, light but firm, rest on my shoulder. Aunt Claire. She had been my anchor for this entire process. "All rise," the bailiff called. The trial itself was a methodical execution by data. Mason's defense attorney, a public defender who looked exhausted before he even began, tried to build a narrative of a simple, loving family. "This is a misunderstanding," he boomed in his opening statement. "A family dispute that has been grotesquely, tragically blown out of proportion by a sister with too much power and too little forgiveness. This wasn't a robbery. It was a cry for help. It was a joke." The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Alvord, just smiled. "A joke. Counselor, let's look at the first joke." She dimmed the lights. The entire courtroom turned to the massive screens, and my life played out in high definition. My bedroom, my open safe, and Mason, his face filling the screen, smirking as he held up my inheritance. His voice, tinny and arrogant, echoed in the dead silent room. "I've seen your jewelry, deeds and the account. Thanks." I heard my mother gasp behind me, as if seeing it for the first time. Mason sank lower in his chair, his face turning a dark, mottled red. "A joke," Alvord repeated, the lights coming up. "A joke that Mr. Hartman continued by taking those items, placing them in his bag, and planning to leave the premises." "Objection!" the public defender yelled. "Speculation. My client was just looking. His sister, Lila, had often promised to share her wealth with her family. He was simply taking her up on an offer." "An offer?" Alvord said, turning to the judge. "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to submit into evidence the defendant's cellular phone logs, specifically a text message sent at 10:16 a.m. on the morning of the joke." The text message filled the screen. To Marco P. From Mason Hartman. Subject: "It's on. My psycho sister is in Chicago. I'm going in. The ring and the papers. We are funded. I'm talking 6 figures. Easy. Get ready." The public defender's objection died in his throat. The family misunderstanding narrative had just been vaporized. Then it was my turn. The prosecution calls Lila Hartman to the stand. I walked past my family. I did not look at them. I took the oath, my voice steady. For the next hour, Alvord walked me through my life. I did not give them a sob story. I gave them a technical briefing. I explained my childhood savings jar not as a tragedy, but as my first asset management system. I described the subsequent thefts as unauthorized access events. I detailed the log files from my home, the timestamps, the user profiles, the clean, undeniable data trail that showed an authorized user, Mason Hartman, willingly and methodically bypassing security protocols he had socially engineered from me. I was factual. I was cold. I was precise. I was, in short, the perfect witness for my own prosecution. Then came the cross-examination. Mason's lawyer approached me, his face a mask of practiced pity. "Ms. Hartman," he said, his voice dripping with false empathy, "you are a very successful woman. You are, by all accounts, a millionaire. Your brother, he is not. He is a young man who has made mistakes." "He is 29 years old," I corrected. "A young man," the lawyer repeated, louder, "who looks up to his big sister. Don't you think, just a little, that you are being too harsh? That you are using a nuclear bomb to swat a fly? Don't you think you are going too far? Putting your own brother in prison for one small, stupid mistake?" He had left the door wide open. I looked at him, then I looked at the jury. "Counselor," I said, my voice cutting through his performance, "a small, stupid mistake does not last for 3 years. A small mistake does not involve the forging of my signature on a $20,000 bank loan. A small mistake does not involve opening 12 separate lines of credit in my name. A small mistake does not involve the attempted access of a secure USB drive containing federally protected, sensitive data from a multi-billion-dollar financial institution. That is not a mistake. That is a pattern. That is a strategy. That is a career." The lawyer took a half step back. I have no further questions for this witness, Your Honor." The trial's climax, however, was not me. It was my parents. They were called as material witnesses. My mother, Diane, went first. She was a wreck of performative tears, twisting a shredded tissue in her hands. "I just don't understand any of this," she wept. "We are a family, a loving family. Lila was always so generous. We just thought she was helping us. That's all." Alvord was gentle. "Helping you how, Mrs. Hartman?" With things, bills, life. It's so expensive." "Things like the American Express Platinum card?" Alvord asked, her voice soft. "The one you used for your anniversary dinner at the Capitol Grill?" She would have wanted us to," my mother cried. Of the $20,000 loan for the new roof? Alvord pressed. Did you ask Ms. Hartman before you signed her name to that loan agreement? He did that, my mother shrieked, pointing at my father. Leonard did the paperwork. I just thought, she has so much. She never runs out of money. We just used her name a little. It was just a name. You just used her name, Alvord repeated, letting the words hang in the air. Thank you. Mrs. Hartman, no further questions. My father, Leonard, was next. He was not crying. He was vibrating with a rage that I had seen my entire life, the rage of a mediocre man who had been publicly contradicted. This is a travesty, he boomed, gripping the railing of the witness box. A circus. This is a family matter. Mr. Hartman, Alvord said, the prosecution has submitted evidence of multiple credit cards and loans, opened in your daughter's name, but mailed to your address. Can you explain that? We were building her credit, he lied, his face turning purple. It's what a father does. He helps his kids. He sets them up. She wouldn't be anything without me. I taught her everything. This is how she repays me? By dragging my name through the mud? So, to be clear, Alvord said, you admit to opening these accounts, but you claim you were helping her? Of course I was, he yelled. She's my daughter. Her money is my money. That's how a family works. From the gallery, I heard Elias Novak give a single, sharp cough. My father's definition of family was, in fact, the legal definition of conspiracy. The final nail was Aunt Claire. She took the stand, the absolute opposite of my parents. She was calm, precise, and radiated an aura of absolute, unimpeachable integrity. Alvord led her through the final piece of the puzzle. Ms. Monroe, can you please explain to the court the nature of the Monroe-Hartman Living Trust? Aunt Claire did. She explained, in simple, devastating terms, the legal structure, the two-key requirement, the ironclad protections. Mason's lawyer, in a desperate attempt to regain control, stood up. Objection. This is irrelevant. It's just a family trust. On the contrary. Counselor, the judge said, leaning forward. This is highly relevant. He turned to my aunt. Ms. Monroe, why did you feel the need to create such a restrictive, complex legal instrument? Aunt Claire looked at the judge, but she was speaking to me. I did it, she said, her voice clear and carrying through the silent room. Because I have known this family my entire life. I did it because I was present at my mother's funeral, where I personally witnessed my brother, Leonard, attempt to fraudulently claim his sister's inheritance should go to his son. I did it because I watched Isla, for 18 years, be systematically ignored, neglected, and used as a utility by her parents. While her brother was treated as a prince, I set up that trust. Because I knew, one day, their greed would make them desperate, and I wanted to ensure that when that day came, Isla was protected from the very people who were supposed to be protecting her. The room was absolutely, stone-cold silent. Mason's lawyer slowly sat down. His closing argument was pathetic. He was broken. He fell back on the only thing he had left. This is a family, he pleaded, his voice weak. A family. They had disagreements, but they love each other. This does not belong in a criminal court. This is a matter for forgiveness. For her rebuttal, Alvord didn't even use words. Your Honor, she said, the defense speaks of a loving family. The prosecution would like to play, as our final piece of evidence, the voicemails left for Ms. Hartman by the defendants after their arrest. She played 3. First, my mother's sobbing, tear-free wail. Isla, how could you? You have to call them off. Mason didn't mean it. You're ruining us. You're ruining him. Second, my mother's pivot to blame. It was his idea, Isla. It was all Mason. He told us you'd be fine with it. Why are you doing this to your own mother? And finally, the crescendo. My father's voice, not pleading, but roaring with pure, unadulterated hatred, a voice that made me shrink even in the witness box. "You ungrateful, cold-hearted traitor. After everything we did for you, you are a traitor to your own blood. Isla, you are no daughter of mine." The audio clicked off. The jury, who had been looking at my parents with a sort of baffled pity, now stared at them with open, cold disgust. The loving family narrative was not just dead, it had been publicly executed. The verdict took less than 45 minutes. Mason Hartman, guilty of grand larceny, guilty of 12 counts of felony identity fraud, guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, guilty of violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. He was sentenced to 7 years in a state penitentiary, with a further consecutive 3 years suspended. He was ordered to pay full restitution for the fraudulent loans and a separate, massive fine. Leonard and Diane Hartman, not convicted of the primary theft, but they were found guilty of conspiracy to commit identity fraud. They were not given prison time. Instead, they were sentenced to 5 years of probation and held 100% financially liable for every single dollar they had stolen in my name. Their credit was shot. Their savings, if they had any, were gone. They were facing financial ruin. It was over. The judge, a woman with tired, kind eyes, looked at me. "Ms. Hartman," she said, her voice soft, "this court recognizes the profound personal and professional violation you have endured. Before we adjourn, is there anything further you wish to say? Any final request?" I stood up. I looked at my parents, who were staring blankly at the wall. I looked at Mason, who was weeping into his hands, a broken child, and I looked at the court reporter, at the official record. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice perfectly clear, every trace of emotion gone. "I want to ensure this entire log is saved. Every transcript, every piece of video, every audio file. I want it all preserved in the public record." The judge frowned. "For what purpose, Ms. Hartman?" I looked at my family one last time. "So that in the future," I said, "when anyone asks me why I cut them out of my life, I have a place to send them to read the truth." 6 months passed. The trial faded from the news, replaced by other, newer tragedies. My life at Aegis Corps had solidified. I was no longer just the insider threat expert. I was the cautionary tale, the one who had survived her own case study. The KPG account was secure, and my reputation, once fragile, was now forged in a kind of fire that few in the company understood. I found myself driving to La Crosse. I hadn't planned to. It was a cold, gray Tuesday, and I just drove. I parked my car on a street I didn't recognize, 2 blocks away from the house they had been renting, the house I had never visited. I walked down the sidewalk, the air damp and smelling of wet leaves, and I saw it. It was a small, flimsy sign, hammered crookedly into the patchy brown lawn. The red and white letters were stark. "Foreclosure auction, public sale, this Friday, 10 a.m. The restitution order, the combined weight of all those fraudulent loans and credit cards, had been a death blow. The court had attached liens to every asset they had, and since they had no assets, it had gone after their income, their ability to pay rent. The house of cards, built on my name, had finally, completely collapsed. I stood there, across the street, watching the house. I felt no joy. I felt no surge of triumph, no satisfaction. I just felt quiet. It was the profound, somber relief of felling a diseased tree. You don't celebrate its death. You're just grateful the rot can no longer spread. It was a necessary, sad, and final thing. I did not go to the auction on Friday. I didn't need to. My second call had put things in motion that were still running. Aunt Claire's legal team, the same one that had protected the trust, had formed a shell company, an anonymous LLC with a name so boring it was invisible. That LLC had attended the auction, with no real bidders on a foreclosed rental property. They had acquired the house for pennies on the dollar, a price well below market value. The legal paperwork was filed. The new anonymous owner of my parents' home was a company called MH Solutions. Monroe Hartman. The following Tuesday, I returned. This was the day, the final eviction. I parked in the same spot, but this time, I walked to the house. It was worse than I imagined. The lawn was littered with cheap, broken furniture, black trash bags were piled by the curb, and in the middle of it all sat my parents, Leonard and Diane. They were sitting on the concrete steps, surrounded by the wreckage of their lives. My mother was holding a cardboard box filled with old photographs, her face gray and slack. My father was just staring at his hands, his shoulders slumped, the arrogant, booming man from the witness stand reduced to a hollow, silent shell. I walked up the pathway. My shadow fell over them first. My mother's head snapped up, her eyes widened, first in disbelief, then in a flash of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves. My father looked up slowly. The rage was gone. There was nothing left, just a vast, empty exhaustion. He was a man who had been so thoroughly defeated. He didn't even have the energy to hate me. "Lila," he said. It was just a name. "Hello? Mother? Father?" I said, my voice calm. I was not here to yell. I was not here for an apology. I was here to close the file. I held out a manila envelope. My mother flinched, as if I were about to hit her. My father just stared at it. "What is that?" my mother hissed. "More lawyers? Are you going to have us arrested for being homeless, too?" "It's a final agreement," I said. "There are 2 documents inside." My father took the envelope. His hands, once strong enough to pull an engine block, fumbled with the clasp. "The first document," I explained, "is a voluntary, mutual no-contact agreement. It states that you will not call me, text me, email me, or contact me through any third party. It states that I will do the same for you. It is a restraining order that we all sign willingly." You're cutting us off?" my mother whispered, the reality of it finally landing. "The second document," I continued, ignoring her, "is a restructured payment plan. The court ordered you to pay restitution for the full amount you stole. This plan reduces that amount by 90%. It requires a minimum payment of $50 a month, to be paid not to me, but directly to the Monroe Hartman Trust. For the next 10 years, it is the bare minimum required by the court to keep you out of default." I looked at them, their faces a mixture of confusion and suspicion. "I do not want your money," I said, my voice cold. "I have no use for it. I just need this to be finished. I need the legal paperwork to reflect that a debt is being paid, and that a boundary is in place. If you sign both of these, today, I will not pursue any further legal action. I will not follow up on the default judgments. I will let you go, and you will let me go." Silence. My mother was looking at the papers, her mind, for the first time, actually processing the numbers, the finality. My father, however, I saw a flicker, the last dying ember of his pride. You, he stammered, his face turning a familiar, dark red. "You come here, to our home." "This is not your home," I stated. "You were evicted." You ruined us," he roared, lurching to his feet. He was not the powerful man from the garage. He was a pathetic, broken old man in a stained t-shirt. "You did this!" He snatched the papers from his wife's hand, his rage giving him a final burst of strength. Your agreements." He ripped the envelope in half, then in quarters. He threw the pieces onto the brown grass. "There's your agreement," he spat. I did not move. I did not flinch. I just watched him. But my mother screamed. It was not a scream of anger. It was a high, thin wail of pure terror. "Leonard, no, you fool! You idiot! What did you do?" She scrambled off the steps, on her hands and knees, grabbing at the torn pieces of paper. "Don't you understand?" she shrieked at him, tears of genuine, desperate panic streaming down her face. "He's in prison. We have nothing. No house, no credit, No one will even rent us a room. This was the last. This was the only. She looked up at me from the ground, her hands full of torn paper, her face a grotesque mask of supplication. She was, for the first time, truly afraid of me. She had finally realized that I was the only person in the world who had been holding her up, and she had just watched her husband spit in my face. My father stood frozen, his chest heaving, the rage draining away, replaced by the dawning, horrific understanding of what he had just done. He had just torn up his last chance. "It doesn't matter," I said quietly. "That was just a copy." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a second, identical envelope. "This is the last one," I said. My father didn't move. My mother crawled over and snatched it from my hand, clutching it to her chest as if it were a life raft. "Now," I said, "we can talk about where you're going to live." They both looked up at me, their faces blank. "The house was bought at auction," I said, "by a shell corporation, an LLC. My father narrowed his eyes. "So, some vulture bought it." "Yes," I said, "a vulture, the Monroe Hartman Solutions LLC. I am the sole owner." My mother's hand flew to her mouth, a small, choked sound escaping. My father just deflated. The last bit of air went out of him. He sank back down onto the steps, a truly broken man. You bought it?" my mother whispered. To throw us out yourself?" "No," I said. "I bought it to take it off the board. I bought it so that you could never again use this address to apply for a loan. I bought it so you could never attempt to get a reverse mortgage. I bought it so that I control the last asset you have, and so that it can never, ever be tied to my name again." I looked at the pile of trash bags, at the broken lamp, at the two people who had given me life and then tried to steal it back. "I will permit you," I said, the words precise, "to rent this house, from me, from my company. I will give you a 6-month lease. The rent will be $300 a month. That is far below market value. It is just enough to cover the property taxes and the insurance." I paused, letting the terms sink in. "This is not a gift. It is a transaction. It is the last dollar I will ever spend on the Hartman name. It is the last bridge. In 6 months, the lease is up, and my company will sell this house. What you do then is not my concern. You will have had 6 months to find jobs and a new place to live. That is the final offer." Leonard wanted to yell. I could see the words trapped in his throat. He wanted to curse me. He wanted to call me a monster. But he looked at his wife, who was clutching the new envelope, her knuckles white. He looked at the curb, at the pile of trash bags that represented his entire life. He looked down the street, where he saw a silver sedan parked, the one I had arrived in, and in the driver's seat, he saw the faint, unmistakable silhouette of Aunt Claire, watching. He said nothing. His silence was the final, total, and absolute surrender. The father who was always right, the man who was building her credit, the man whose name was his bond. He was gone. I looked at them one last time. My mother, weeping on the grass. My father, a hollowed-out man, staring at the concrete. I turned my back on them. I walked away. I did not run. I walked. I walked past the broken lamp, past the trash bags, past the crooked foreclosure sign. I felt my mother's sobs behind me, but they sounded very far away. It felt, I realized, like closing the door to my high-security safe. That final, heavy, satisfying thunk as the bolts engage. This time, the code was one I would never share. I got back in the car. Aunt Claire didn't say anything. She just put her hand on mine for a second, and then she started the engine. On the drive back to Madison, my phone rang. It was not a family number. It was Elias Novak. "Isla," he said, his voice warmer than I had ever heard it. "I'm calling for 2 reasons. First, your case file. It's become something of a legend here. The legal team is using it as the new gold standard for internal reporting. You've set a new protocol." "That's good to hear, Elias." "It's more than good." The board was impressed, and disturbed. They were disturbed that one of our own could be so financially vulnerable, from their own family. So, they've greenlit a new proposal, the Aegis Corps Employee Financial Protection Initiative, a new confidential department to help our employees who are victims of, let's call it, familial financial abuse. We provide legal counsel, forensic accounting, and security support. We're going to use your case as the primary training module, anonymously, of course. That's a good idea, I said, my voice quiet. It is, he agreed, and the board has requested that you lead it. It's a promotion, director level. You'd be building it from the ground up. I looked out the window at the passing fields, a department to protect people like me. Elias, I said, I accept. We finished the call. I had my new life, a new job, a new purpose. But before I put the phone away, I made one more call. Aunt Claire glanced over as she heard it ring, then smiled as she heard my side of the conversation. Auntie, I said, when she picked up. I'm right here. Isla, are you okay? I am now, I said. I was just thinking, that one call I made, the one that changed my entire life, the most important one. Aegis Corps? She asked. No, I said, looking over at her, at the strong, steady profile of the only person who had ever truly protected me. It wasn't to my company, and it wasn't to the police. It was the one I made to you. That day, right after, that was the call. Thank you. She just nodded, her eyes on the road. I hung up and lowered the phone. I looked forward, at the long, gray ribbon of highway stretching out in front of me. My brother smirked. My parents laughed, and I made one call. It wasn't to destroy a family. It was to save the only part of that family that was still valuable, the only part that had been worth a damn. Me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please, let me know your thoughts in the comments. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from so we can connect. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories and like this video. You can also show your support by hitting the hype button. It really helps this video get heard by so many more people.